Hey, welcome to the Week 6 edition of Injury Report Live. I am Steve Buchanan alongside Meghan Townsley, and we are going to go over all the injuries you need to know about before setting your daily fantasy lineups, making your bets. Everything you need to know is going to be right here in the next 45 minutes. So we welcome you to the show, whether you're watching on Twitter, whether you're watching on YouTube. Make sure to drop us a line on Twitter at SBuchanan24, at Meghan Townsley with an extra Y, right? Is it right? Is that
two
right?
Ys? Yes, two Ys. You nail it every week. Yeah, there it is. There it is.
Drop us there on Twitter, on X. You can also drop a comment in the YouTube chat as well. We will get to that as the show goes along. Now, Meghan, usually we like to look ahead at what's happening on Sunday. That's the injuries we want to concern ourselves about. But, I want to use this as a little bit of a therapy session here for just a moment because, last night, big on Jordan Mason. I was like taking alternate rushing totals on him last night. Over 100 rushing yards was like plus 170. And I'm like, oh, that's a banger right there. Because like his line coming into last night, I think it was 82.5 is where it closed. Seattle's run defense has been horrific. And I think Mason was like coming out of the first quarter with like 43 already or something. And thanks part to that huge run he had very early on, looking like it was going to be an easy over. And then even after that single carry that he had in the third quarter, he was at 73 rushing yards. It was like, all right, even with all the time lost, still looking good. Never touched the field again. Looking like a sprained AC joint, not expected to miss a lot of time, but obviously a concern moving forward for the 49ers, who end up having used like Patrick Taylor, and the other guy's name is escaping me. It sounds like Guerrero, but it's not Guerrero. But nonetheless, that was a very depressing night for me last night. Even worse than when I saw Joker 2. I left that just so depressed on how bad that was. But just like Joker 2, my bets were terrible. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I had to get that out into the world, and I had to make myself feel better. So thank you for letting me just go off on there.
No, of course, everyone needs to rant. Everyone needs to get that off their chest. But I mean, I don't know if the Niners are expediting CMC's return because now they're saying about beginning of November. That's not that far from now for someone who has two, barely functioning Achilles. I don't even know if he's walking right now. So Jordan Mason's out, Patrick Taylor, former Packer, carrying the ball a couple times. The Niners are lucky to have gotten out of that game yesterday because, I mean, they did have a pretty, I would say, impressive dominating win, but they've been all over the place recently. So yes, this Mason injury is a concerning factor for them, but I think the Niners are heading in the right direction no matter what.
All right, so let's get to the injuries that are forthcoming, that are going to be here, that we're going to be dealing with here. Let's start with one of the most important ones, and I think it's one that a lot of people are reeling about, Nico Collins. And what's going to happen with the Houston Texans from here? Placed on the IR officially, so going to be missing a handful of games here. And it is going to be so difficult to replace him. Because when you start going through the numbers, like we know how heavily he was being used in that offense, but like when you really start looking at the numbers, it's really eye-popping to see this. 37% of the target share amongst all of the Houston wide receivers, had the fifth most targets in the league. In the entire league, had the fifth most targets here. Obviously, guys like Garrett Wilson are right up on that list too as well. And then in the red zone, 7 red zone targets for Nico Collins. That was more than double anybody else on that team. So what do we think is going to happen here, particularly here in week 6? A lot of people are already talking about, this is where we get the Tank Dell resurgence. Is this where we kind of get Stephon Diggs in a more consistent role? Although he's going to have a tough matchup in coverage this week. He's probably going to be getting the Christian Gonzalez treatment here. So where are you kind of leaning here? Because I have an idea that maybe you aren't going to mention, but I'll let you go first and let's see what you have to say.
Cool. Yeah. Well, first, I am one of the many fantasy Nico Collins owners that was just heartbroken by this and scrambling to make some trades in my season long. But that's, a story for another time. The thing about Tank Dell is he had such an impressive season last year, drafted pretty high in fantasy leagues this year, but he's still priced pretty high on daily fantasy, 6,200 for not having much production at all. So right now, in 2023, his threat percentage, which for those who aren't aware of that stat, it's pretty much saying when you are running a route, what percentage are you actually being targeted? So in 2023, his threat percentage was 24%. That's a pretty good number. Now his threat percentage is only 15%. Wow. So I just don't think that, there's no Collins. I'm just not liking what Tank Dell has been showing us, even when he was CJ Stroud's guy. I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan of it. So I'm liking Diggs more in this matchup, who he is a lot more expensive. Like you're talking about paying up 7,400 for Stephon Diggs. But he's only gotten one reception less than Nico Collins throughout this entire season. He obviously had a pretty good game going against his former team and the Bills last week. He's averaging 4.7 average yards per catch and also 19 yards after the catch over expected, which is a good mark. This team in general has been, I believe, the second or first most team that has collected the most yards after the catch, but that's a big, factor because of Nico Collins. So I do like Stephon Diggs, but talk to me a little bit about that Gonzalez matchup, because a couple of weeks ago we were saying that Christian has not been living up to the same caliber he did in the first couple games he played in 2023. Do you think that he's kind of been upping his game since the start of this season?
It definitely seems so, and especially last week too. He was really good against Miami too, and obviously going up against guys like Waddle and Tyreek Hill is not an easy task. So like really nobody was a big factor in that game. I think Tyreek Hill closed that game with the most receiving yards. I think it was at 69 or 70. So, nothing earth shattering here. So it maybe feels like Gonzalez is starting to turn a corner, because remember, he's coming back from a season ending injury last year, missed a good chunk of the season. And before that injury happened, Gonzalez was, one of the best corners in that league to start the year. So maybe he's starting to kind of get back on track. So I think maybe that's why people are kind of shy away from Diggs, because if this was against like a poor secondary, I think you'd be hearing a lot more about Diggs, a lot more about Tank Dell. But where my head's kind of at right now is that maybe this is more for Dalton Schultz. And I say that because if you start to look at the numbers for Dalton Schultz last week, he didn't even receive a target in the first half of the game. In the second half, when Collins was out, that's where all 6 of his targets came from in the second half of that game. 6 targets, 4 catches, 34 yards. Not a huge game by any means, but New England has been a defense, and thus far, and I have to make this clear too. When you're talking about how a defense does against opposing tight ends, you always have to take that with a grain of salt. There are some offenses who just simply do not utilize the tight ends at all. So, a defense doesn't even have to worry about some of those positions from an offensive standpoint. They're just blocking. Some teams like to use the tight ends a lot more, and that's where those numbers can really kind of, bounce up and down. So, take this with a grain of salt, but at least to this point so far this season, New England has allowed the 7th most receiving yards to opposing tight ends, and Schultz right now is coming in at about a 4% ownership projection, so really, really low on the spectrum at this point. 4,100, I think Schultz is someone I'm going to be looking towards, because that is something that CJ Stroud, without Nico Collins, he was going to early and often in that second half of the game last week. So I think Dalton Schultz actually might be the, kind of like the secret sauce maybe that they need this week. So that's just kind of where I'm leading. Maybe I don't go Diggs or Tank Dell. Maybe I'm leaning more towards Dalton Schultz at this point.
I'm not mad about that. Honestly, that sounds like a good play, especially when kind of tight end play is so inconsistent this season. We've talked about that before, besides, like guys that have stepped up like Tucker Kraft, and Trey McBride did pretty well last year returning from injury. So I'm not mad about that, especially because when you think about the number one, I would say weapon on that defense, like we just said, Christian Gonzalez, he lined up 70% of snaps last week, close to the boundary. So I don't think he's really going to be covering the center of the field as much, probably where Dalton Schultz would hang around in that slot position a little bit more. So I think that would be a good spot for him. Going back to Dell or Diggs real quickly, if you do want to play them this week, I again would kind of take them as a boomer bust, because this is going to be a heavy pass or passing offense, because that's just what Nico Collins does. I mean, that's what CJ Stroud does. Excuse me. That's just what this offense is built off of. So those guys are going to get targets. They can get the red zone targets too, but you are paying up for them. So if you want to pay that price, I think that you could get at least maybe 10, 15 points out of them. I'm just a little worried because of this defense.
And also, what kind of game is this going to be? Because Drake May starting at quarterback. This is going to be his first game that he started. We saw him very briefly in that game against the Jets when he was kind of doing mop-up duty there. What if this game gets out of control? Do they start running the ball more with Mixon, who's looking like he's coming back this week finally after a lengthy absence, which is going to push back Cam Akers? So Mixon's back in the mix now too as well. So what's even to say that there is going to be a necessity for this to be a pass-heavy game? So there's just a lot to digest for this game here, for a game that you probably didn't even expect to have like so much, so much going on in, right? Like there's a lot to digest in this game, but I think Dalton Schultz is the way to go in this one here. I think that's going to be a little bit of a sneaky play, especially with how the ownership is starting to shake out right now. Diggs is at about 10% ownership. Tank Dell's pretty close behind him at 8%. So nothing huge for those two guys, but some noteworthy notes in that one there. Let's talk about another big injury that came down. Michael Pittman Jr. is going to miss a handful of games now, too, as well. What does this look like for the Colts offense, who continue to just have a barrage of injuries all over the field? I think Anthony Richardson, I believe, is a game time decision. Was that the latest that we got from him?
He was labeled as questionable,
Yep.
but I think he's been gearing up to play. I'm not
Okay.
100% positive on the status, but I know for sure he was labeled as questionable.
Jonathan Taylor will also not be in this game as well, so that's obviously a huge loss there, but we kind of already saw that last week. Trey Sermon was the RB1. Goodson was kind of mixing in as well. They really kind of split the carries 10-5. So nothing I don't think is going to change there. But really what I want to talk about is how different this offense has been with Anthony Richardson and with Joe Flacco. Flacco has been flat out amazing. I almost don't want Richardson to come back at this point. Flacco has been so good. And especially if he plays this week, he just gels so well with like Alec Pierce, Josh Downs. And this is a kind of a tough matchup here too as well. Because Tennessee, for as bad as they've been offensively, they have been really good defensively. And I don't feel like that gets talked about enough. Through the air, on the ground, they've been great. And I would worry a lot if it's Richardson at this point, because he has been, passing wise, he's been abysmal. He's completing like just over half of his pass attempts when he's on when he's been on the field. Whereas you have Flacco, who's been like a surgeon out there. He's been surgical, so good. And it makes me like the matchup for Josh Downs a lot in particular, because if you look at their slot coverage, they really haven't faced an offense thus far that has been like a team that like goes to their slot receiver a lot. Josh Downs would be like the guy that they have seen the most when it comes to how an offense treats their slot receivers. Because if you look at the numbers here for Roger McCreary, who has been covering the slot, he's only been targeted against 14 times, 9 receptions for 59 yards. Like, this would be a really good spot for Josh Downs. I really want to play him if it's Flacco. I don't think I'm going that route if it's Anthony Richardson, though.
No, I 100% agree on honestly fading the majority of these wideouts if it's Richardson, because he's just so unpredictable. It's not worth it. And talking about the chemistry that Josh Downs and Joe Flacco has had, it's been absolutely insane. Like, just to echo what you've talked about, Josh Downs has had 151 receiving yards in the past 2 weeks, which is the most amongst all of these wideouts. He has a 35.6 threat percentage, best on the team. But the Titans have allowed, like you said, the fewest receiving yards to slot receivers this season. So it's like, okay, do you think it's because they really haven't faced a good slot receiver? Is this something that Josh Downs can exploit? It's kind of a toss-up there. I honestly, personally am leaning towards starting Josh Downs, just I think he's very talented. He's got strong hands. If you have that connection with Joe Flacco, he's going to get the targets. But let me also put up another matchup that people are talking about. But if you put an A.D. Mitchell in there, Adonai Mitchell, who is going to be that wideout receiver on the boundary, taking over for Michael Pittman Jr., he kind of did a little bit better last week. He's also very dirt cheap, 3,900 on daily fantasy. But him and Alex Pierce both run a decent amount of deep routes, and the Tennessee Titans defense have allowed just a league high 52.9%. Oh, excuse me. This is Alex Pierce's stat. I confuse my stats. Alex Pierce, he's running deep routes on a league high 52.9%. And the Titans defense have allowed offenses to just complete 2 out of 11 deep passes. So I'm looking at that for Mitchell and also for Alec Pierce, because those are the two names that are popping up a lot. I don't know if those two guys are worth it, just because this Titans defense is able to get rid of that deep threat and are leading the league in that right now. So while Alex Pierce went 3 for 3 for about 20 something fantasy points last week, like, he's been very boomer bust. I don't think it's worth playing him or Mitchell in this matchup. I'm really only leaning towards Downs.
Yeah, when you're looking at, targets of at least 20 yards, Pierce leads the team with 10 of them. He has 6 catches, 295 yards, and 2 of his touchdowns there. Mitchell is second on the team with 7, but he only has 1 catch out of those 7 targets that he's had of at least 20 yards. So obviously, Pierce has been the more consistent when it comes to those deep down threat pass attempts. But like we mentioned, Pierce has been the guy there. But again, if it's Anthony Richardson, I think I'm kind of steering clear in this. I think that the Colts are just, they're not unplayable, but there has been such a stark difference between when you're playing with Joe Flacco, when you're playing with Anthony Richardson, which is so odd to say out loud and to believe it, but it's true. Like, that's kind of how it's been. Flacco has just been like that good in a matchup that is really tough against, as I mentioned, the Titans have been so good defensively. I don't know how well Richardson is going to succeed, whereas I would trust Flacco in this spot a little bit more. So that's kind of where I'm at a wait and see approach here with the Colts overall. But I think if it's Flacco, I'm very comfortable taking downs. If it's Anthony Richardson, I think I'm just going to be leaving the Colts players on the board for this week.
Fair enough. But let's take it to the backfield because Jonathan Taylor has also been officially ruled out again. That was expected, dealing with an ankle injury. He'll probably be out for a couple of weeks. So last week we were kind of 50-50 on Trey Sermon, deciding on, okay, like, is it a good matchup for him? Do we trust this Colts backfield? He dropped 18 fantasy points. Like, he did, honestly, hands up, he proved me wrong. I was not super excited about him, but he did very well. He even upped his price by $300 too for this week. 10 attempts, 38 yards, and a score. Do we trust him this week? Again, going against a Tennessee defense that has been playing well. Their just record does not show it, obviously, because also Will Levis is officially starting this week. For those who didn't see that, we're going to have him back under center. So offense-wise, I don't really feel like talking about their offense. But anyways, Tennessee Titans, they have generated a league-high run stuff rate of 25.7%. So that's very something to pay attention to, plus how the Colts offensive line is going to manage against this defensive line. So do you think it's a good play to play Sermon this week, or are we fading them completely?
I need to know the quarterback. I think that's just really kind of where I'm at too, because obviously Levis is back. I don't know if that's a upgrade or a downgrade at this point. Like, I'm really not sure over Mason Rudolph. Like, that's a very low bar to clear. Like, who's the more adequate quarterback at this point? Like, at the end of the day, I just think this game's going to be a mess if it's Richardson and Levis. Like, I really think this is just going to be like total slop fest. Like, I don't know how excited I would be to play anybody if it's those two. I'd probably be more excited to play their defenses. Like, if I want to play the Titans defense, or if I want to play the Colts defense, I could get behind that if it's Richardson and Levis. But, I think the problem with Sermon is that he had a good enough game last week that people are going to start gravitating back to him. And that's where I kind of, what I don't like. Because last week, it was a great time to strike because Jacksonville, not good against the run. There was no real contingency plan of who was absolutely going to be the RB1. Remember, they said it's going to be a running back by committee. When you're building fantasy lineups, you don't want to hear that because you don't know who to play. You don't know who to trust. So if you happen to make a dart throw and grab Sermon and he did well for you, great. That worked out well. But now the ownership's going to start rolling that way because it's like, oh, well, he did pretty well. And now it seems like he's the RB1 and he's only 6K. It's not a great matchup either. So, if it's Flacco, I'll feel better about it. If it's Richardson, not for me. I really that's what it really comes down to me. I need to know who the quarterback is going to be before I really make a strong decision on this. But I would lean towards no on Sermon just because, like you mentioned, Tennessee has been great against the run. And I don't think people are talking about that enough. Like, they have been very, very good. And someone like Sermon, sure, you can do well against Jacksonville. Can you do that against Tennessee? I'm not convinced.
Yeah. And just to throw out a guy that I do like other than Sermon, if that's where you're leaning in that direction, but Tank Bigsby is cheaper than him at $5,900, and he's just been going off recently. Talk about taking over that running back one role, ETN fantasy owners, but he had a 65-yard run last week. I mean, he's averaging 8 yards a carry right now, getting more volume. So there is a guy out there that I think can produce more than Sermon. Okay, let's take it to an injury that we saw last week. Malik Nabers, stud wide receiver for the New York Giants. He is officially out again this week due to a concussion, a lingering concussion. Sometimes we see some guys come back in a week. Sometimes it takes longer than that, but he did not pass concussion protocol coming up for this Sunday. So with him out last week, we discussed Wan'Dale Robinson is probably could be a good play. Maybe he's going to be the one to pick up the majority of the targets. But talk about Darius Slayton and what he was able to do last week. He had 8 receptions out of 11 targets, 122 yards, 1 touchdown, 29.2 fantasy points versus broken Seattle defense, which we saw last night versus the 49ers. So honestly, with Nabers out, I'm immediately just looking at Darius Slayton to play. It was 4,600. That's not that expensive. Wan'Dale is sitting at 6,100 right now. Last week he completed 6 and 9, 36 yards, 1 touchdown. So didn't really collect that many yards. Are you leaning in either direction? Or are we just, okay, let's play Slayton this week?
Slayton is such a boomer bust for me. And I think last week you saw the boom. People are going to be like, oh, this is going to be the guy. But while it was nice to see last week, Robinson has been consistent week in and week out. And we kind of talked about this a little bit last week. It rang true once again last week as well. He is going to be a target monster. He had 9 last week, 6 catches, and they went for 36 yards. Like, the dude just does not get downfield. He is like a running back. He gets like it feels like it's not actually happening, but it feels like all of his targets come from behind the line of scrimmage, and he gets like 3 yards and he's done. That's just how it is. Like, I don't get it. Like, they're not going deep. He's not getting far. I don't. It's like Zach Ertz in his last couple of years with the Eagles. It was like catch ball. That's it. But I'm out. From a PPR standpoint, it's great. He's great. He's a PPR monster at this point. If he's gonna get 10 targets and catch 6, and maybe fall into the end zone, then you're doing okay. So, people are going to gravitate towards Slayton. I still think Wan'Dale is the one here. He's got a pretty good matchup here in the slot against Mike Hilton. Again, someone who really hasn't been targeted against a lot yet, but 14 targets, 9 receptions, 78 yards. Like, that feels like a Wan'Dale Robinson type line, right? Like, bunch of catches, handful of yards, and we'll call it a day with Wan'Dale Robinson. So I would choose Wan'Dale Robinson over Darius Slayton. I will say, though, like, Daniel Jones might be a really solid play this week. Cincinnati's pass rush is non-existent at this point. They are not getting to the quarterback at all. The days of Cincinnati's, extraordinary pass rush are gone. They are no longer here. Just like Joe Burrow's hair. It's like they're gone in the past. We don't see it anymore. But that's just kind of where we're at right now. So I think this could be like a sneaky week for the Giants receivers, because if Daniel Jones has time to throw, and this has been consistent all throughout his career, he's got phenomenal numbers when he is working with a clean pocket, has time to throw. He's been great. It's always been when he's under pressure that he just turns into a puddle. It's kind of like Matthew Stafford. Like, the numbers are they're not close. They're vastly different from when he's working with a clean pocket to when he's not. So I'm still going with Wan'Dale Robinson. I just think that the PPR points are going to be there, but I can absolutely understand why you want to go Slayton as well, because he has that big playability. And, drawing 11 targets last week was eye-opening. That's not usually a number you see from him to get like that for somebody who really was getting like a handful, 3 or 4 targets a game. That was a massive jump for him. But, also consider the opponent. Seattle's secondary is not good. We saw that last night, saw that in that game. So just to keep in mind, but I think it's Wan'Dale for me.
Yeah, talk about a blessing matchup-wise for the Giants, who lost their wide receiver 1, who pretty much was the only guy getting offense for this team and, keeping Daniel Jones employed. Actually, let me shout out Daniel Jones, because last week he totaled more deep yards in week 5 with 71 than he did in weeks 1 through 4 combined. Ooh. So again, that's going against an abysmal Seattle secondary, but I'll give him those flowers. There you go, Daniel Jones. But now they're going against Bengals defense that has also just frustrated me so much. Poor Joe Burrow. Poor Joe Burrow has to play perfect football to be able to barely pull out a win and then lose in overtime last week. So right. I feel bad for him. But, again, these wideouts for the Giants are getting a decent matchup. The Cincinnati defense, they're allowing the 7th most total yards and allowing an average of 19.6 fantasy points to wide receivers. So I don't think you can go wrong with either Slayton or Robinson. I think what it really breaks down to is, do you want consistency with Robinson paying at a little bit of a higher price, or do you want to save some money with Slayton, hope for that boomer bust? Maybe he'll get a touchdown. Maybe he'll only get 5 targets.
Yeah, like I said, I just think Wan'Dale's a safer option. We've seen that all throughout the year. And especially if you're playing in a PPR format, it's hard to deny what Wan'Dale's been able to provide in that type of scoring format.
Yeah, and then also let's take it to the backfield here too. I feel like a lot of these matchups that we're going through today have injuries just all across the board. But Devin Singletary, he was ruled out last week. He is questionable right now for this game against Cincy. And we had another rookie step up to the plate last week in Tyrone Tracy Jr. He had 18 carries for 129 yards. He averaged 17.2 or 7.2 yards per carry, 17 fantasy points. So pretty good show out for a rookie that really wasn't getting much hype before he started playing. And this is also an interesting position to be in too, because you see these numbers jump off the page, right? So I feel like a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Tyrone Tracy, but I don't know if this is really the solution here, because if you want to play him, then Singletary comes back, he's benched and he's not going to get any of the points. So you definitely have to pay attention to if Singletary is going to be good to go or not. I also believe that this game could end up being a shootout because of how powerful Cincinnati's offense is. If the Giants are playing from behind, they're going to need to go pass heavy in this matchup. So yeah, Tyrone Tracy did play well last week. I don't think he is a pretty safe option to go for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you here too. Like Cincinnati's actually been okay against the run. They haven't been like a team, where opposing teams are gashing. Whereas, Seattle has been a team that teams have been gashing. And, that was one of the biggest reasons why I was on Jordan Mason, like alternate yards last night, because, okay, so here we have Tracy, who's gotten almost no work in his career in the NFL career. Now he goes for 18 and 129 and about 7 yards per carry in that scenario. Like, okay, if Seattle's run defense is that bad, then that's why I'm on Mason. This is a much different story here. And I kind of like where your head's at too. Like, I think this is going to be kind of a shootout here, because at least from what we saw last week, Tracy really wasn't getting any targets out of the backfield. He had 2 last week, and that was a pretty close game against Seattle. They only won by 9 points. So, maybe Tracy isn't going to be that option here. So I'm with you. I'm not going too crazy about Tracy at this point, because we still need that confirmation about Singletary, but I'm definitely taking a kind of wait and see approach on him, at least for this week.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's take it over to Washington, who's taking on the Ravens. The Ravens, who are finally seeming to fill out to the team that we expected them to be after starting off 0-2. But Robson Jr. dealing with a nagging ankle injury. He didn't participate in practice on Thursday, and now today he is going to be a game time decision. Dan Quinn said right there, taking up to the game. This was one of the conversations that I was nervous to have, because we're talking about Austin Ekeler again, for someone who last week we were like, oh, it's kind of forgettable. No, because we keep talking about him. So we're making him, bring his name up anyways. It's so interesting if Brian Robinson does not play. Ekeler and Jeremy McNichols have a completely different snap share. Right now, Ekeler has a 42% snap share. Nichols has a 19.5% snap share. But I think what's really the most important thing to remember here is that McNichols' share has come in garbage time. Washington has come out of the gate and they have been hot recently, blowing teams out of the water. So a lot of the times his snaps have been coming in the third, fourth quarter when this team is up by at least 15 to 20 points. So if you're thinking about in between Ekeler or McNichols, Ekeler is the better option, but I don't even like that as an option. What are you thinking here? Yeah.
The biggest thing for me is that they don't seem to trust Ekeler in the red zone. That's a big red flag for me. He has not taken a goal line carry this year. He does not have a goal line touch this year. McNichols has more touches in the red zone at the goal line than Ekeler does. So that's concerning for me. Does that mean I want to play McNichols? Not really. I said last week, maybe you can kind of take a shot on him. Maybe you can grab something. He got into the end zone. He got 10 DraftKings fantasy points. That worked out well if you were bold enough to go and take a shot with him here. The other thing is, like, this is going to be, like, we're talking about shootouts. This is potentially one of the biggest, highest scoring games of the week. On DraftKings Sportsbook, the over-under for this game, the game total is at 51.5, which I believe is the highest on the slate. So we're expecting a lot of points in this game here. Ekeler is just, I don't know what it is. It's like, and I don't know how the team is really going to handle, a full complement of Austin Ekeler, because quite frankly, Jaden Daniels can do it on his own too as well. Jaden Daniels has taken more carries in the red zone at the goal line than Austin Ekeler at this point. So 5,600 for Ekeler is not terrible, but we haven't seen him take more than 8 carries in a game. That's not going to get it done. He needs to, catch a bunch out of the backfield to really kind of bring, be worth his salary at 5,600. Like, I don't know if he's going to go and get 15 DraftKings fantasy points. We haven't seen it yet, because like ideally you want at least 3 times the salary for him to kind of be worth it. Can we squeeze 15 points out of Austin Eckler at this point? I mean, unless he's scoring outside the red zone, he's not getting the opportunity. So that's just kind of where I keep getting hung up on Eckler. Like, I think people are going to try to play him just, based on the role alone, but I don't like it. I really don't at this point. I think Eckler is going to be a fade for me at this point, because I don't think Washington really trusts him in that zone, because you remember the past couple of years too, he's had issues with fumbling the ball. Like, that was one of his big issues in his last remaining years with the Chargers. So I think that's kind of where my head's at here. I think I'm going to be okay fading Eckler this week. If he beats me, he beats me. Hands up. I'll say I was wrong. But that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I'm glad we didn't have to bring up Akers again, because every week we've been like, okay, we play Akers and he goes off. Don't get mad at it. Okay. But okay, let me scare the people off away from Eckler even more than we already just did. But Baltimore, they're first in opponent rush yards allowed, averaging just 60.4 opponent rush yards allowed each game. And also they are currently 31st in opponent pass yards. So that leads me to think that this will be a shootout, because their secondary is not as good as we saw last year. You do have Kyle Hamilton, but I believe, defensive coordinator moving to be the head coach over in Seattle. That's a big change to this defense, and it hasn't been as strong as we've seen before, but their rush defense has been good. So what we're telling you right now, stay away from Austin Eckler until further notice.
Yeah, I think that's the right move at this point. It just doesn't feel like Washington believes in him. That's kind of where I'm at. And if you're getting that type of treatment, even with someone like Brian Robinson Jr. out, then that's kind of a red flag. Let's continue with this Devontae Adams stuff. You're not going to see him in a Raiders uniform again. I'm convinced by that. And a lot of people want to know, like, where do we kind of go from here? Where is the slack going to be picked up? Because, we thought last week, maybe that's where it starts going to, Jacoby Myers, and he's kind of the more consistent one, but he's got a questionable tag on his ass this week too as well. 9 targets last week, 6 catches, 72 yards. A fine game, not a great game. Is it Bowers who's been pretty inconsistent? I mean, this team is just a mess right now. And it sounds like it's Aiden O'Connell again this week, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah.
Here's what I'm saying. You got this Raiders team, who is just a mess right now, going up against one of the best pass rushing teams in the league, in the Pittsburgh Steelers. I want nothing to do with a Raider this week. Nothing. I love where the Raiders play. I love Las Vegas. If I didn't have kids and a family, I would live in Las Vegas. But I want nothing to do with that football team. I want nothing to do with Myers. I want nothing to do with Aiden O'Connell. I mean, Pittsburgh has been so good at getting to the quarterback that it's a big red flag for me. And if you kind of see that situation where the quarterback is not able to get out the ball efficiently or anything like that, then that's going to be a problem, because this was a big problem for Aiden O'Connell last year when he was starting. And if you look at his numbers so far this year, it's been a very short sample, but Aiden O'Connell has been under pressure on almost half of his dropbacks already, 44% of his dropbacks. He is 5 for 13 in that scenario, which is a 38% completion rate for 43 yards and 3.3 yards per attempt. That is abysmal. Do you want a bigger sample size? Go back to last year. Under pressure on 35% of his dropbacks, 5.2 yards per attempt, a 45% completion rate. It's not good. So going against the Steelers this week, there's not much to like about the Raiders at all. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't think anybody is playable this week. Maybe Bowers. That's probably the only one that I would go to, because obviously over the middle, that's where you can get your quick throws or whatever. But that's all that I would consider this week.
I think this is getting personal. Your beef with the Raiders every week is just building up a lot more.
You know what? And the funny thing is, I don't really have a vendetta against them. It's just sometimes as the season goes along, you just watch a team and you're like, this team blows. And then you start having a problem with them, because why are they ruining the great city of Las Vegas, one of my favorite destinations? They just lost the Tropicana. There was no need for that. Nobody wants the Athletics to come to town. And now they're putting out this piece of crap football team week in and week out. It's just, what are we doing to the wonderful city of Las Vegas? That's kind of where I'm at right now.
That's fair. I mean,
the sports teams in Las Vegas.
That's why Devontae Adams wants out. Plain and simple, right there.
I don't blame him. I don't blame him.
Yeah. No, and just put more fuel to this fire. I mean, TJ Watt very possibly could be lined up against a backup rookie right tackle in DJ Glaze if their starting right tackle is out this game, who, according to Next Gen Stats, has already allowed 13 pressures and 2 sacks so far, versus TJ Watt has generated pressure on a sack on 23.2% of his pressure since 2018. That guy is just absolutely insane. Also, 35-year-old Cam Hayward, who is still playing lights out ball right now, he's generated 11 pressures on 83 pass rushes this season so far, 13.3 pressure rate. We already said what O'Connell has done under pressure. Just last week, he only completed 44.4% of passes under pressure and just 50% of his passes in general last week. So if that is not enough evidence, please do not play the Raiders, and we can close the book on that.
I'm glad you agree, though. I'm glad you agree. Like, I do. You don't have the hate for these teams, but I take it personal. You hurt my city. That's not really my city. I just like to say it's my city, and I get offended, and I take offense to that.
Fair enough. Okay, let's take it to now. Oh, there's a couple options that we could go here. I'm gonna take it to New Orleans.
Yes, let's do that.
Speaking of another quarterback switch coming on over here, Derek Carr goes down with an oblique injury last week, which on a hailing effort to try to take down the Kansas City Chiefs, which everyone's trying to do, right? So now we have rookie Spencer Rattler coming in, who has not taken a professional snap in the regular season. He did play in the preseason. This is some scary territory for me talking about these wideouts, because you have Rashid Shaheed, who's been a very, very consistent deep ball threat. All 10 of his entire career touchdowns have come in the last third of the field, or 9 of them have been on post routes. So he is just a completely streak down the field kind of guy. Chris Olave, very inconsistent. Last week, put up, I think, maybe less than 10 fantasy points. I don't have the exact number in front of me. And now Rashid Shaheed is also questionable. It looks like a disaster over here. Kamara's questionable. He'll probably play. What do we do with New Orleans? Because right now it also seems like a mess.
I'm actually kind of surprised that they're going with Spencer Rattler, because I know Jake Haener wasn't great last week, but at least he has a little bit more experience at this point. Because what worries me is that the Saints might have one of the worst offensive lines in the league right now. They have been brutal. That has been a real sore spot for them. Their right guard, Landon Young, I think he's only played 3 games, but since he's come back since week 1, he's already allowed 9 pressures over the last 2 weeks. Like, that's not what you want to be seeing. And then you're going to throw this poor kid in the mix. And that's concerning, because the Bucs, they blitz a lot. I think they're blitzing like the 8th highest rate in the league right now. So, we don't have anything on Spencer Rattler. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what we're going to see from Rattler, because like, that's just disingenuous. Like, I don't know what we're going to see. You don't, nobody does. So like, for me to be like, oh yeah, this is going to be a bad play, because Rattler's understanding, like, I don't know. But like, what I do know is the Saints offensive line is a big problem. The Bucs are going to get a lot of pressure on said quarterback, whoever it is at this point, and that usually is going to lead to a lot of problems. The usage of Olave is really weird. I think he ended up with like 4 targets last week. There we go. 4 targets, 2 catches for 10 yards. Like, it feels like it's definitely shifted from Olave to Shaheed at this point, because Shaheed has been, it feels like, the more trusted target for Derek Carr at this point. What is that going to mean, for this week for Rattler? Like, I don't know. But all I know is that I think Rattler's going to be in for a load of trouble this week. He's just going to be under pressure a lot, and that is concerning for me, for a rookie who is getting his first, snaps under his belt. So I think the only way that I'm going to even be considering is probably Kamara, if he can end up playing. I think that's the only way that I would do that, because obviously he's a huge threat to catch out of the backfield. Like, he gets targeted more than almost any other running back at this point. So I would feel very safe with that. Like, you see last week, 8 targets, 6 catches for 40 yards. He's going to carry the ball probably at least 10 times in a game. So Kamara is probably the only way that I want to go for. But, pass catching wise, there's nothing that interests me in this game for the Saints. I think it's just going to be one of those, like with Bryce Young. Right, like Bryce Young constantly under pressure. Like, you can't trust any of his receivers when he was under center. And then, Dalton comes in, it changes everything. Now we're kind of playing some Panthers more, but I think it's going to be that type of situation where it's just like your guys constantly under pressure. You're not going to be able to get anything downfield. So Olave, Shaheed, those are all sits for me this week.
I agree. And plus, there's also the factor of Taysom Hill, who has been dealing with a rib injury for a while, but he could be even taking some snaps under center. He's a threat to run the ball. So it's like, are we going to see Rattler the whole game? I don't know. I agree with you. I don't want to give any false promises or information on this game because it really is going to be a big question mark. The only thing I can say is that if I'm a rookie quarterback and Yaya Diaby is coming after me, who has a team high 21 pressures right now, that would be a little terrifying. So I agree. Kamara is pricey though, so always got to throw up that percentage right there. But he's 7,700 on DraftKings right now, but he'll be able to get those catches in the backfield. So I think we're in agreement here. We're just going to go with Kamara. Okay. Let's take it over to now Buffalo and New York Jets on Monday. This is a little difficult of a conversation because normally on Friday we get some pretty solidified injury reports, some tags, questionable tags, game time decisions, but that's not going to happen until tomorrow for Khalil Shakir and James Cook, who are both right now dealing with two different injuries that seem pretty serious coming in to this important matchup against the Jets. When Shakir didn't play last week, we had some problems with the wideouts. Keon Coleman only had one reception for a large 49-yard touchdown. So, collected points in that way. Kincaid, 2 receptions, 35 yards. Matt Collins, just 27 yards, 2 receptions. It was pretty scary territory over there. And yes, going against a Houston's defense that put all of the pressure on Josh Allen and also just has a good unit in general. But now we're going against a good Jets defense that have some crazy weapons out there. I don't think I'm liking any of these wideouts in Buffalo if Shakir is not able to go.
Yeah, Shakir would be my number one choice by far. He has definitely been their wide receiver one. He's been great in that slot role for them. Whereas there is no one that can really replicate, what he can do in the production that he's had. In the offseason, we kind of thought that maybe Curtis Samuel was going to be that guy. It is not. He has been non-existent. And the funny thing is too, is that when Shakir was out, the Bills were like, oh, we want to get Curtis Samuel, in the mix more. Well, that really didn't happen last week either. So it's just I don't know what they're really kind of doing with this guy because he had 3 targets and he had 1 catch and he's barely even seeing the field at this point. So it's even the Bills don't really know what to do with their offense, it feels like at this point. So, and it's a tough matchup going up against the Jets. Obviously the Jets are in a weird time right now, obviously, with getting rid of Robert Saleh, and then where's this going to come from? Is this going to light a fire under them? Is this going to do more harm at this point? We don't really know at this point, but I do know one thing: Jets have been very good defensively. That is one thing that you can rely upon. So without that solidified number 2, because would it be Dalton Kincaid at this point? Maybe he's the more wide receiver 2 on this team. That's kind of the only spot I would go right now is Kincaid. I feel like he's been the more consistent when it's needed to happen. And the Jets have given up a decent chunk of yards to opposing tight ends as well. So I think it would be Kincaid for me. We'll definitely have to watch on James Cook as well. His usage has been a little up and down throughout the year too as well. I know he ended up getting 20 carries, I think it was last week, so more back into that top role. But the week before, some inconsistencies there. So I think Kincaid's probably my favorite on the Bills for this week. But there's still another day for them to practice and see what we can get from that report.
Yeah, and to be fair, to kind of explain more what happened with the wideout situation, Josh Allen only completed 9 of his 30 pass attempts against the Houston Texans, whose pass rush with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. has just been playing absolutely insane ball this season. So there's, those 9 targets were separated amongst 5 different receivers. So if James Cook does say, we got Ty Johnson would be the wide receiver 2, or the running back 2, excuse me. He's only had 10 carries for 42 yards and 1 touchdown so far this season. And the Jets D, they held Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler to just an average of 2.7 yards per attempt last week overseas. So I don't even think Ty Johnson is even worth bringing up for this game. That salary you see there is going to be for showdown because it is a Monday night game. Again, Cook is very 50-50 right now. We're not super positive on his injury status, but I don't even think you should consider taking anyone else from the backfield, even if James Cook is not good to go.
No, if anything, I think Ty Johnson would be more for in a passing down play or something. I think that's where Ty Johnson would land. Even if James Cook is out, he just hasn't been a great runner throughout his career. So I think that would be a pretty easy stay away from me.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we got not really breaking news, but decently breaking news. Anthony Richardson is tracking to play. So at the top of the show, we told you that everything that we mentioned about Alec Pierce or Josh Downs. That all goes out the window if Anthony Richardson plays, because we do not trust him under center. So stay tuned, because this is definitely something that we need to watch if he does play or not, but tracking to play makes it sound like we might not be getting another Joe Flacco legacy game.
It's too bad, because I have been enjoying these legacy games over the past couple of weeks. I like Anthony Richardson as a player, but Joe Flacco's just kind of doing it for me right now. So that's a little disappointing on my end. I will say that.
Yeah.
I think that kind of covers it this week.
It's just double checking. I don't think we have much else to go with. Devonta Smith is going to play. There's another positive injury update, so I'll throw that out there. But I think we kind of got through the list in good time today.
Excellent. So that is going to conclude our week 6 edition of Injury Report Live. Make sure to tune in here every single week, every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, on Twitter, on the DraftKings Network Twitter. Of course, visit DraftKings Network as well. All the start, sit, advice, betting advice that you could need lives on that website. So visit us, please. We have a lot of great content from a really good, solid group of writers on the team. So make sure to visit that as well. That's going to wrap it up for this week. For Meghan Townsley, I am Steve Buchanan. We will see you for week 7 next week.
International recording artist / icon.
Piece of cake to the face.
Live from the DraftKings Las Vegas studios, Eve Aoki.
This is the good stuff. Ooh. We all want that hit. We all want that chase. Let's go. That's why I still open up pack trying to get that hit, because I've hit it before.
You smell fantastic, by the way.
Yeah,
is that conditioner?
Breaks are so crucial. Need a little butter on the popcorn right now, you know?
Steve, I don't hear you cheering.
No, I don't even.
Okay. Thank you. Yep, that was good. That's just me and Steve Aoki hanging out. Just another day. But I love that. I was in Las Vegas, my favorite spot, Las Vegas. Love Las Vegas. That's where all the memories are made. Let me try this one more time.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Let me try this one more time. Thank you for tuning in to Injury Report Live. We'll be back with you next week, week 7. Twitter, YouTube, anywhere you can watch this. We'll catch you then. Goodbye. No more videos, right? We're good?